Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the launch of LBDA's 2023 Community Webinar Series. My name is Allison Feldman, and I am the CEO of the Lewy Body Dementia Association. Throughout the remainder of 2023, LBDA will be hosting a series of webinars on a variety of topics, including vision changes in LBD, disease-modifying treatments, and coping with movement changes. Before I introduce you to today's presenter, I would like to tell you a little bit about LBDA. The Lewy Body Dementia Association is a 501c3 national nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness, research, education, and support for families and individuals affected by LBD. To learn more how we can help, please visit our website at lbda.org. A few housekeeping items. You are welcome to submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Following the presentation, we will reserve about 15 minutes for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, and an email will be sent to those of you who registered in about a week with a link to the recording, and you will also be sent information about upcoming webinars. And now I would like to introduce today's presenter. Julia Wood is LBDA's Director of Professional and Community Education at LBDA. She is an occupational therapist specializing in the assessment and treatment of people with Parkinson's disease and related dementias, serving as part of an interdisciplinary rehab team at LBDA's Research Centers of Excellence at the University of Pennsylvania for many years. Julia has served as faculty for the Parkinson's Foundation team training for Parkinson's programs since 2016, certification and training faculty for the LSVT BIG program since 2018, and served on the Parkinson's Foundation Rehabilitation Task Force in 2021. She has co-authored the first American Occupational Therapy Association practice guideline for adults with Parkinson's disease in 2022 and serves on the Comprehensive Care Subcommittee for the World Parkinson's Congress. Thank you so much, Julia, for presenting today, and welcome.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Allison. And thank you so much to everyone for all of the support online and sharing this with your communities. To all who have registered, we've had an outstanding response to this event. And so we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And as Allison said, you can definitely put your questions, if you would like, into the Q&A. Oops, that's the wrong one. Let's try this again. It only likes that one, evidently. Okay, so let's make sure. Here we go. This should be correct. There we are. All right, so I'll start this from the beginning. And so, as Allison mentioned, I'm an occupational therapist, and this topic is very near and dear to my heart. So today we're going to talk about these cognitive challenges in Lewy body dementia, what they look like, because they're often a type of hidden disability that many times family and friends and even the individual with Lewy body dementia don't recognize. And then we're going to talk about some ways to cope and work through these challenges. So the goals for today are going to be to really define what dementia is and also what cognition is, and highlight the differences between the cognitive challenges that are faced by those with Lewy body dementia and those with Alzheimer's disease. And why do I start this way? Because for so many of us, Alzheimer's disease is synonymous, or we feel like equals dementia. But there's a huge difference in these two conditions, as you'll notice today. We're also going to define the cognitive domains that are impacted by Lewy body dementia, so you hopefully have a better understanding of what those look like in your day-to-day life. And ultimately, I'm going to put on my OT hat and share with you many strategies that I've learned through the years from the families who were so patient and gracious to let me work with them and learn from them in my practice, and what really worked for them in coping with these challenges in their daily life. So let's start with a definition that probably most of you are familiar with, but just in case, I think it's really relevant to always note that dementia is not a specific disease. It's rather a vague term in ways. So it's just a general term for the impaired ability to remember, think, or make decisions. And this is the dementia part that interferes with doing everyday activities. There are a lot of things that can impact our thinking and our memory, like aging for one, and mild cognitive impairment. But when we're talking about dementia, what's really characteristic is that it interferes somehow with people doing things they need to do in their daily life. And so how do we define Lewy body dementia? Well, it's a progressive brain disorder, so it does advance over time, and it features these abnormal protein deposits, which are called Lewy bodies in the brain. And you can think of them like little clumps that kind of clog up the neurons and prevent the transmissions from going through smoothly and getting where they need to go. And they're named after the neurologist who discovered them. It's Dr. Friedrich Lewy, actually, who's German, but we say Lewy. And you'll notice below that Lewy body dementia actually encompasses two specific types of dementia: Parkinson's disease dementia and dementia with Lewy bodies. The difference in which you're diagnosed with is based on the timing of the symptoms of the 1-year rule. So you can think about it as which comes first. So in the case of Parkinson's disease dementia, someone has changes to movement and ultimately a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. And they have that for some time, at least a year or more, before these cognitive changes start to happen that impact everyday activities. In the case of dementia with Lewy bodies, the cognitive changes happen first or at the same time as those movement changes or Parkinsonism. And so it's really, Dr. Jory Fleischer sometimes calls it the chicken and the egg under an umbrella. So in the case of, it's what comes first. Parkinson's disease comes first, it's PDD. In the case of dementia with Lewy bodies, the dementia comes first, so that equals DLB. So what do we mean when we talk about cognition? And I always like to frame this because I noted for so many of my clients over the years who were highly intellectual, very smart, very educated people, is we tend to kind of think about our intellect as the same as cognition. And so when we start to have these issues with cognition, it really impacts someone's self-esteem and really their identity. But it's important to note that this is just a general term that refers to the mental abilities that we use to process information and apply knowledge. So my doctors and engineers and lawyers or whoever you are out there, school teachers, it doesn't mean you're any less smart. It's harder for us to get to that information sometimes and to process it. But if you think about it, I always tell people like a computer, you know, all of the information that you've stored over the years in Word documents or Excel files, that would be your intellect. That's the knowledge. That's what we've put in there and that's what we've kind of stored. But when we're talking about cognition, we're talking about how you access those files. So maybe you can't remember if you stored it under R or S, you can't quite find the file, but you know it's there. That's what we're talking about. And so these processes really can impact our daily life. So we're going to talk a lot about attention today because that's a significant issue for people with Lewy body dementia. We'll be talking about how these different changes impact performing daily tasks. Even as simple as finding the right word in conversation, which often people think is a memory issue, when it's actually word finding. And then even solving problems or doing more complicated tasks. So we'll take a little look at all of those things today. So first, I want to start by showing this graph, and I think this does such a great job of highlighting how different the cognitive changes are with Alzheimer's. You'll notice at the top, that top graph is for Alzheimer's disease. And on the bottom graph, those are people with dementia with Lewy bodies. And so this research by Dr. Furman, she looked at all these different cognitive assessments. You notice at the bottom. So there were assessments that looked at global cognition, the dementia rating scale there. That looked at memory, at language, at attention in the yellow, visuospatial function in the blue. And look at the two graphs, just don't even look at the detail, but kind of sit back and look and notice how they're almost opposite. And so for those with Alzheimer's, you notice the memory measures, those red bars are most impacted. Those are really below that line kind of in the center. And then also the language measures. So naming a lot of times is an issue with Alzheimer's disease. Now, if you compare that to the bottom, so those folks with dementia with Lewy bodies who did those same assessments, and notice how different. We really see more issues with attention and executive function measures. So you'll notice those yellow bars are much lower on the bottom graph than they are for the top. And also visuospatial measures. And we're going to go through all of these domains today and talk about what they are, what they look like. But I think if you have people in your family, or maybe you joined in today and you were thinking, it's all kind of the same thing, hopefully this helps you acknowledge that, wow, these are very, very different cognitive presentations. So I wanted to throw this slide in by one of our scientific advisors, Dr. Jennifer Goldman, as kind of an overview before we get started with some of the non-pharmacological or kind of strategies that we're going to talk about today. So this is really what you want to think of as a big picture of managing these cognitive issues. So number one are objective assessments. And this can be important to get a baseline assessment with a neuropsychologist early on so that these changes to cognition can be tracked and watched over time. But then also serial assessments may be needed. So doing some type of a cognitive screen, a mini mental or a MOCA, Montreal Cognitive Assessment, or even other types of assessments on kind of a regular basis, usually around 6 months to a year, depending on the assessment. It's always important if you notice some sudden change in cognition that you exclude other causes. You want to talk to your doctor and let them know, wow, we've really noticed a huge difference and it's not getting better. So this sometimes might be related to something as simple as a urinary tract infection, or maybe some type of a change or a reaction to a medication. And then there are some medications that are available for dementia that you can discuss with your provider, and she's listed those there below. And really, really important that we not ignore the elephant in the room, because safety, of course, can become an issue. Visuospatial and executive function can really impact someone's ability to drive safely. Also, work performance, especially with multitasking or complex tasks, can become impaired even early on. And then even safety within the home and things like wandering over time. And with all of these changes, you want to make sure that you've got a plan in place or some people in your team to help you address and cope with these adjustments. So this might be the psychosocial impact of those role changes, like I talked about, and kind of that self-perception and identity. Even to relationships with your family and friends. So this is where having a social worker or a psychologist or counselor can be very helpful for your family. And then ultimately, you want to recognize and address cognitive fluctuations. And in my time as an occupational therapist, I found these to be some of the most confusing and frustrating symptoms for families and care partners, and even the person living with Lewy. And that's where the person all of a sudden seems kind of zoned out, and that loss of attention happens. And it's important to note that that can happen moment to moment, or you could have a good day or a bad day. And the big thing to take away is they're not faking it. Just because someone is really attentive and engaged 1 minute and maybe seems really zoned out or confused the next, there's no faking going on. That's just what's happening in the brain. And then it's important to really make as much use as you can of some of these non-pharmacological strategies or non-medical management things. And that's what we're going to really focus today's talk on. So as we're going through these strategies today, I'm going to have you all kind of put on your own OT hat. I think that we all have an inner occupational therapist. And I want you to think about considering the strengths and the challenges of these three things. So a lot of times, one of the models we use as OTs is considering the person. So what are the strengths of that individual? And that could be perhaps they really have a lot of interest in something. They're very motivated to engage. That's a strength. Maybe they have great family support and care partner support. Also a strength. Maybe a lot of attention or executive function skills are really intact. That would be a strength. But then at the same time, acknowledging the challenges. Maybe fine motor coordination. So doing fine movements with the hands has become more problematic. So you want to think of what are the strengths and the challenges for that individual. And then we also want to consider that in the case of the environment. We're going to talk about that a lot today, as far as lighting, contrast in the environment, safety, all of those things. Looking at kind of what are some of the strengths about your environment, and maybe what are some of the challenges. Sometimes we live in tight spaces, or there's a lot of clutter, a lot of furniture, or maybe you've had to move into a smaller home, or you have stairs you're negotiating. So we'll talk about those things today too. And then ultimately, when we say occupation, we mean a task. So what are those, things that the individual wants to engage in? Be it things they have to do, like shower or bathe or dress or groom, but even things that are enjoyable, socializing with friends, going to exercise classes, taking advantage of hobbies. So we want to think of all of these things and look at them from a strengths perspective and kind of see what the challenges are too. So with that, I'm going to put up a little disclaimer before I really get going here. And I want to make sure that everyone in the audience knows that finding a strategy that works is absolutely unique to the individual. In all the years that I worked with clients, what worked for one individual might not work for the next, might need to be a little bit tweaked, and also might not work day to day. So that strategy or approach may work for a while, but then you might need to adjust it. So don't be hard on yourself. Don't get frustrated. It doesn't mean you're a failure or your family is failing. It means that we're trying to hit a moving target. Be creative. Try as many approaches as you can. Like I said, put on that OT hat and really think about how to approach a task in a different way. And ultimately, you can always enlist help. Occupational therapists are there to help you identify strategies to help you be successful. Speech language pathologists we'll talk about, then physical therapists, sometimes social work. And after this, when we send out the video link for the recording, it will also include a list of resources to help you as well. And the biggest one here at the bottom, please, everyone out there, be it living with Lewy or a care partner or family member, give yourself grace. Lewy is a moving target. What works one day, 1 minute, may not work the next. So try to give yourself that grace and that pause and that patience to see what works and what doesn't. Okay, so with that, we'll get started here. So I wanted to start with attention. And the reason is I heard this great talk last summer by a neuropsychologist who described attention as the mother of all cognitive domains. And if you think about that, there's a lot of truth to that statement. If you and I meet at a party and you tell me your name, but I'm paying attention to the tray of hors d'oeuvres going by, it's not that my memory is bad as to why I don't remember your name. I wasn't paying attention when you told me. And so often people will confuse aspects of attention with memory deficits. So when we talk about attention, it's that ability to selectively focus on an aspect of the environment or a task while you're ignoring things that are competing with that. So trying to balance your checkbook with the TV going, which one are you paying attention to? So there are a lot of things that can challenge this, especially in our modern world. So different sights and sounds in the environment. It could be the person mowing their lawn outside earlier that was driving me crazy, leaf blowers, or pings from your email notifications, or maybe your social media or your phone ringing. And also, we know that for people with Lewy, and we're going to talk more in upcoming webinars in August about visual changes, but decreased contrast sensitivity with vision can be related to the loss of dopamine in the brain. And that can make it harder to visually attend because you have a harder time seeing things. Multitasking is definitely the enemy to attention. And so you can think about, I know I use the computer analogy with the brain a lot, but what happens if you have too many windows open on your computer and you're shifting back and forth a lot? Eventually it slows everything down, right? That's what multitasking really does. So trying to stay one thing at a time. Slower processing speed or bradyphrenia is very common with Lewy. So it takes a little bit longer for the information to go through. So you can think of that on your computer, like when you try to open the window and you get that spinny wheel while you're waiting. You know the information's there, It's just harder to get to it. And that processing speed can make it more difficult to attend. We also know that slower movement or bradykinesia is very common for people with these Parkinson's related conditions. And so a lot of times turning the head or scanning with the eyes can make it more difficult because all of that is slowed down. Often people may have reduced hearing sensitivity, and so that can impact that auditory attention and hearing what's being said. We know that with some of the oculomotor changes, so those little movements of the eyes can impact visual scanning for people. And you'll notice at the bottom, I put the big one there, those cognitive fluctuations are one of the biggest challenges for people with Lewy to attention. And so you really want to think pause and patience if someone's having a fluctuation. Give them that time. That's not time to solve all the problems of the world or balance your checkbook. So some strategies for this. We talked about the environment earlier. Number one is to reduce distractions as much as possible. And you want to think about this as both visual distractions and also auditory distractions. So turning off the television in the background when you're trying to have a meal, if your loved one's been having trouble attending and eating. Maybe having, the visual clutter down as well, keeping your space organized for the dining table, not having a lot of clutter on it if meals are a problem. So really thinking about looking at your space and seeing all of those distractions as a possible challenge. And helping to limit the focus as much as possible. So I mentioned earlier that multitasking as much as you can, and this is for everyone out there. I've started doing this myself from a brain health perspective, trying to focus on one task at a time and avoid that going back and forth because that really becomes the enemy of attention. You can become fatigued cognitively, just like your body can become fatigued. And so taking a break is important. We really demand way too much of our attention, including this webinar today. Attending for an hour and 15 minutes is a long time. So taking a little stretch break, maybe, shifting your focus for a little bit, taking a walk, something just to let your brain rest for a bit. And trying to remain in the present moment as much as possible. There's not strong evidence per se on mindfulness for people with dementia, but I think for, thinking of ways to turn down the internal chatter. And that's really what mindfulness is about, is trying to be in the present moment, not thinking about what you need to do or should have done or haven't done, but just remaining focused on the task at hand. And then lastly, to really hold someone's interest or attention, it's best if they're interested in whatever it is, right? So leveraging interest for that individual, trying to find activities that are engaging and personal and relevant. And I'll give a little example here too of something that happened with one of my clients one time that was a big eye opener. So he was interested in seeing films, right? And he had home health aides that would help. His wife had passed some years ago, and so he had help in the home. And they thought, well, he just needs to go see a movie. So they come back into a session and they say, we took him to a movie. I know that was one of the things we identified he liked to do. And he kept trying to get up and leave the movie. And this man was such a gentleman. This was really uncommon for him. And so they felt like it was a behavior that he was trying to get up and leave this film. So I was asking a lot of questions about his comfort level, his clothing, time of day, all of those things. And then it hit me. What film did you take him to see? Shaft. I have to tell you, this gentleman was an art curator. Definitely would not have been a film he would have picked. And so we talked about finding films that were of interest to him. Like there was an amazing Toni Morrison documentary that was playing. He loved art. There was a film out at the time about Van Gogh. And I kind of turned them onto the theater that he had always gone to, which was kind of an art house cinema. And you know what? He never tried to leave a film again. So sometimes what we think are behaviors are when we haven't really hit that interest for that person. And so it's not just do they like movies or do they like music? Think about yourself. You might like music, but do you like all kinds of music? Do you like every film that's out there? Of course not. So as much as we can, we want to make sure that we're really zeroing in on what is most meaningful to the individual. All right, so now we'll talk about executive function. And this is one that I think gets a lot of confusion as far as what it is, right? So this includes the ability to plan a task, organize how to get ready to do that task, initiate it, and also regulate the goal-directed behavior of, have you completed the task? Are there more steps to do? Kind of like her picture here of this woman and her looks like grandchild baking. All of those things get complicated, building a piece of furniture, following a recipe. And there's a lot of places that this can become problematic. So what does this look like? Like I said, you've got to kind of plan and problem solve. And sometimes that might be looking at different ways that you can approach a task. What are some of the ideas that you have, some of the plans you have for going about that task? You want to organize your space and your plan. You have to then initiate that plan. Then we have to regulate and kind of see where we are with it, right? A lot of times there is some multitasking in executive function of kind of going back and forth between steps. We want to avoid that as much as possible, but sometimes we might have to go there. And then sometimes even switching tasks in between. So there's some strategies that you can employ, and I have to admit, I've employed these for myself and they've been really helpful. So thinking about ways to step back and first kind of survey the problem and the situation. And I want you all to think about these strategies both. You might be someone out there with Lewy who's kind of newly diagnosed, you feel like these strategies are for you. Might be someone out there who your loved one is more advanced. And so you're kind of thinking of these strategies of how to kind of guide them through this and how to support them. So then we want to problem solve and think about the different possible solutions and look at the pros and cons. And then we want to make a plan, right? It might be drafting a list or kind of having a checklist of what needs to be done, what the steps are that you've identified. And then checking and double checking. So monitoring yourself and adjusting the plan as needed. And then once again, there it is, that paying attention to trying to remove those distractions. And again, we need to take breaks. Our attention really starts to wane after a while. You might need to kind of regroup and set yourself back up to move forward with that task. Be tidy and organized. That's going to come up a lot because all of that clutter really can become a distraction. And then break up tasks. You want to approach tasks step by step and try to complete each step before you move on to something bigger. And then this one's so important. If you have a loved one, friend, care partner, grandchild, whoever it might be, ask them for support. Ask them for some feedback. Like, I was going to try to do this. I had a gentleman one time that wanted to build a koi pond, right? And he was in kind of a moderate stage of dementia, had some support at home. He really, really wanted to do this. And so I worked with him and with his spouse on kind of what the plan was going to be. We made a list of things they needed to purchase, steps to solve it. And she was really his feedback person of like, I think we're going to have to think about this, or maybe we skipped a step here. So this is an example of something that I use specifically with a client who wanted to bake. So this lovely woman was all of a sudden having flat cakes, and she baked all the cakes for her family for birthdays, and her, cognitive issues were progressing and she was really having trouble. And so what we did was I set up kind of this little process for her to help with her executive function. So first I had her gather all the ingredients and all of the tools that she needed to do the task. And this could be done with help too, if the person can't do it independently. Then we checked all the ingredients off the list. So we had everything set up, we had everything set out. For baking, often things are isolated into wet and dry spaces. So I had her separate her workspaces. We had one for wet and then one for dry. So that kind of separated those tasks. You'll notice on the picture here that I had her use a sticky note to kind of block her text so that she was only looking at and viewing and attending the step that she was on. And then ultimately I had her cross off the steps as she went. And voila, no more flat cakes. And she was very, very happy. Now, as she progressed, what started to happen was she had a grandchild that liked to bake and came and kind of helped with this same process, kind of making sure that she was getting everything set up. And so you have to look once again, the person, the environment, and the task. What can we do to help make that person be successful? And then, of course, we have to find the just right challenge for that individual. So, let's say the person liked to bake, and maybe doing the full baking from scratch really isn't feasible anymore. Maybe you roll out the cookie dough and they're using the cutter to cut them out or to frost the cookies, right? Going a little over to the next one here, maybe the cookie mix. So instead of baking from scratch or a cake mix, you could do that, and that simplifies that whole process. And then the other option here is having a slice and bake option. So if somebody really wanted to bake cookies, but maybe they can't make the mix, you can either make the dough for a type of cookie that they slice, or you can buy a slice and bake. So this is an example of ways to kind of adjust that task to meet the needs of the individual. All right, so I wanted to show this, and I want to be clear about what this is and what it's not, and how I used it with people with cognitive impairments. So this study was specifically looking at cognitive strategy training for people with Parkinson's with a subjective cognitive decline. So keep in mind, they did not have a true cognitive impairment yet. But this is what I think is really helpful. These questions here, and you can ask yourself this, or as a care partner, you might think of this for your loved one. What challenges might you run into with this activity? So do you think it's going to be being able to follow the steps? Do you think that it's their vision, or maybe their fine motor control? What do you think is going to be hard? And then, is there anything you could do to make the task easier? That's kind of what I just walked you through there. Maybe baking the entire cake is too hard, but there are these ways that we could scale it down. But if baking is something that person really enjoys, trying to find ways to keep them engaged. All right, so now let's get into language a little bit. And like you noticed in that graph earlier, this is something that we see as far as naming objects more impaired in Alzheimer's disease, but it also relates to generating words, comprehension, and then also different verbal concepts. And so there are some things that we see with Lewy. So the number one thing is people often have trouble finding the right word. And we call it tip of the tongue syndrome, where it's right there. We all have this happen sometimes, and you feel like you just can't find the word. And this is what is often confused as a memory impairment. People think, oh, I just can't remember this person's name, or I can't remember this word, where it's really more that retrieval of that. People often start to use simpler language with Lewy body dementia, and they'll even start to speak less overall. And if you think about that bradyphrenia in conversation, that slower thinking, it can be more difficult to kind of follow the trail of the conversation if a lot of people are speaking and speaking really quickly. So there's some strategies for word retrieval that you can trying to use the word with the same meaning. And so you can even prompt this or kind of cue this as a care partner. Sometimes gesturing can trigger the memory of the word. If it's just right there, you can kind of draw it with your hands. Describing as much as you can about the word. It's a large farm animal and it produces milk. That would help somebody figure out that it's a cow. Trying to recall the first sound or the first letter of the word. Sometimes trying to write the word or draw the word will bring that forward for someone. The biggest one with all of this is taking your time and not pressuring yourself. The minute you layer anxiety or stress on top of these issues, it makes them a lot worse. And so really just, give me a minute, it'll come to me. There's that drawing a picture or maybe trying to visualize the word. And then identifying the category that it's in. It's a large animal or a tractor or a type of farm equipment. And then ultimately, you'll notice here at the bottom too, it's important to seek assessment and treatment by a speech language pathologist. And I always advise people do this early on. It's easier to learn strategies and get things in place and develop that relationship with that therapist to really help across the stages of Lewy than it is once everything's on fire and communication is tough for them to intervene. But you can see speech at any time. All right, so now moving into visuospatial function, I find this is one of the most confusing aspects for people. So these abilities and this is separate from maybe, the movement of the eyes or visual acuity. We're talking really about the brain's ability to map space. So it tells us where things are around us in space, and it even involves our sense of direction or being able to find our way in our home or in the community. So one of the number one issues that I always saw in my practice is people will set items sometimes too close to the edge of a table or a surface, and then the glass or cup may fall off and break. Often people may perceive items as being closer than they are. My friend with Parkinson's disease dementia, when he's over to visit, sometimes he'll look like he's having trouble getting out of the chair. And I'll, what's going on? And he's like, that table's in my way. Well, the table's 10 feet away from him, but he doesn't notice that until I go and stand by it. So sometimes that mapping can become really challenging because people may perceive something as being in their path that's not. People can have challenges to identifying people and objects and recognizing faces. They may have difficulty telling objects that look very similar apart. Sometimes people can bump into walls or furniture, which can become a little bit dangerous, especially if it maybe makes them teeter or causes a fall. And how many of you have seen when you start to go to a chair, reaching for the chair before you get there and the feet start going? So having a difficult time estimating that distance to a chair when approaching to sit. And as you can imagine, this can impact judging distance and space when driving. And for care partners and family members out there, it's important to really keep those conversations open about driving. The person with Lewy, a lot of times they don't know they're too close to the line. They don't recognize that they're too close to the car. You don't know what you don't see. So helping your loved one understand, like, hey, I don't think you realized it, but you were really close to the line, or you were, really close to that car earlier. This can contribute to people having difficulty finding their way in their home or in their community. And these changes can be very subtle, and they can happen very early on in Lewy body dementia. So important to be aware of these. So some strategies to help support that visuospatial function. Number one is using contrast in the environment. We tend to live in a very beige world where we've got neutral colored walls, neutral colored furniture, neutral carpet. And so that all just kind of blends in and blurs for the brain if it's having trouble mapping. It can be helpful then to provide some type of a visual target, like a coaster on the table that's brightly colored, or a placemat for placing dishes or items. I had a gentleman once who was breaking all the dishes when he would unload the dishwasher, not all of them, but a lot. And that was one task he really wanted to continue to do to help his family. And what I noticed in working with him was he was having trouble seeing, especially if you notice something like a glass, it's like a clear bubble, right? So that was a lot of what he was breaking, were their clear glass dishes. So I had him put a placemat on the counter when he was unloading the dishwasher, and we got bright colored shelf liner in all of their shelves. And then he could see, his brain could understand where it was that he was trying to place that item. It gave him a target. You can also utilize dishes or glassware with color. You can probably see this cup I've got that's really bright a lot better than you can see this glass bubble next to it. You can use colored tape or decorations for visual contrast. So sometimes, having a brightly colored throw or a pillow on that chair that someone sits in all the time can just help their brain by giving a little more information as to where that chair is. It's really important to ensure adequate lighting in the home, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. Once again, you're going to all think I'm Marie Kondo here, having you reorganize your home, but minimizing clutter really does help with that visuospatial function too, because there's less things for the brain to have to try to figure out. And I wanted to share this. I found this online, and it's more related to like website design, but a lot of times I think people aren't really clear on what it means by contrast. And this gives an example here of, you can see how some colors show up really well on other colors in the background. So they show kind of the foreground and the background here, and it gives you an idea of how to use different colors together to really promote that contrast. And how many times do you hear, where did I put that? People lose or misplace items. So you want to simplify the environment. Place only essential items for everyday use in view, especially on like bathroom counters, dressers, and separate items in an organized way. I find that a lot of times people are assumed to need assistance or help before they really do, a lot of times, if you just modify the environment to help them be more successful. You can also add bright colored tape to things that are used every day. We did this with my friend's cell phone recently because he was having a really hard time finding his phone. And so, you want to try to give a little bit more pop of color for the brain to find that item. Another way you can do this is dimensional fabric paint. And I've got a picture on the next slide that kind of shows that. So you can put a dot or a star or a heart on anything you want so that someone, is looking for it, they can kind of find that item. And then I think it's helpful to really set an anchor point in each room too, where it's the only place in that room that you put items you need to find. This could be your glasses, keys, phone, my asthma inhaler. Putting those things only in that one place. So some examples of this, there's a little basket there. That's a way that you could organize maybe grooming essentials. That also could be a way, if you want, that could be an anchor point in a room too, that you have a little basket there and that is the only place that you put X, Y, or Z items that you don't want to misplace. In the middle, that's an example of dimensional fabric paint. It kind of comes in like a squishy tube, so you can use that to mark. You can put their name with it. You can put anything you want. It's like you can essentially write or draw with it. And then on the far right side, that's colored duct tape, which they have in most any color now. And you notice that bright color contrast on it. That's a lot easier to see than like my cell phone here that has nothing on it. That's very hard to see. So some tips for reading, and this can be problematic early on, and this was something I always fought to really help keep my people reading as long as they wanted to. The number one thing is to consider some large print books or things that have a stronger contrast. So, looking at fonts or maybe printing things even with a contrast. Clear away other items from the surface where you're reading because that clutter, once again, is going to compete for attention with the brain. And then when you can, avoid glossy pages, so things like magazines or glossy flyers, the glare on those can make it very difficult to read. You can use a ruler or a bookmark or a line magnifier to help move from line to line of text and really help with that visual attention. And I have a picture on the next slide to help you see what that looks like. And then avoid trying to read pages with a lot of different sections and paragraphs and photos. So if you think about like the front page of the newspaper, I had someone at a point that thought, I can't read the newspaper anymore. I look at the first page and I'm just done. So what we started doing was downloading the articles then. I think that's the next one. Yeah, I would download the articles that she was interested in and print them off. Also, you could cut it out and put it on a piece of paper so it's just in one flow of text, which can make it easier. And then also audiobooks, and it doesn't have to be all or none. I have some people in my book club that do a chapter with their audiobook. They do a chapter, reading and kind of break it up that way. So these are all just tools to help. And then also a book light or some type of a magnifier can really direct the light directly onto the image you're trying to see or help magnify the text. And here's some images of those. The top picture you notice is a book light. There's a lot of different variations of these that will clip on to different things. And then you can really adjust where the light is positioned. You'll notice the picture there on the right-hand side, that is a bar magnifier with a highlight bar through it. So you can really line that highlight bar up over the text and you see how it makes that pop out a little bit more. And at the bottom, there's 1,000,001 types of magnifiers. This is just one that's a stand magnifier over the image or over the book that the person's trying to read. So, I had a question from someone even prior to the event. So with getting dressed, is it vision for someone? Is it cognition? Is it, movement? Like, what's the problem? It can be all of the above. So we're going to talk about, as far as these visuospatial issues and kind of visual issues with getting dressed, some different strategies to help. Number one is to organize closets into sections. So think about having a section with just shirts, maybe a section with just pants, and then maybe a section with just dresses or suits or accessories. And then as an alternate, you can think about placing each outfit on a hanger. So if that person has things or you can have outfits you tend to wear together, you can just pull that out. And this can help for a couple of things. It can help you locate the item and not have to dig for it. Sometimes it can take the time pressure down a little bit on getting ready too. So you're not feeling like you have to dig and see what matches or what goes together. You can also organize clothing in drawers in a similar manner to how you organized in the closet. So sometimes placing a photograph or a label on the drawer to help find the location. I want to have a little caveat here for a moment. This can be very different based on the individual too. Sometimes someone might respond to a label that just says socks or underwear on it. Depending on the level of cognitive impairment or the difficulties they're having, it might be better to place a picture of socks on the drawer. For my friend, that didn't even work. So it was a picture of the inside of the sock drawer on the outside of the drawer, and then he can find it. So you really do want to look at what works, be creative, be variable. You can use that same labeling once you find that works anywhere in your house to limit frustration for looking for an item. So I know my friends ended up putting this in their kitchen where they have a picture of what's inside the one drawer on the outside of the drawer. So he knows now when he sees that drawer, what's on the inside before he opens it. And then this is really helpful too, to reduce that clutter, is to eliminate clothes that are not worn frequently. So maybe things that are out of season, things that maybe you haven't worn for a long time, and consider putting these in storage and kind of getting them out of the way, decreasing that clutter. So let's look at some ways. When we think about visuospatial function, I always think of safety too in navigating the home. So keeping the home well lit and working to minimize shadows can really help with that safety and navigation, but also reducing those illusions or where people feel like they see a monster in the corner, but it's a coat hanging on a hanger. So really keeping that light up to help the brain have more information. Using contrast wherever possible, and we talked about that earlier. You can place a sign that has an arrow pointing the direction of the bathroom they're going to, or you can place a sign on the door of the bathroom at gaze level. Now, what do I mean by that? So you want to look at where someone's gaze level is. So for you or I, it might be more straight ahead, right? Or maybe slightly below eye level. Notice with your loved one though, sometimes for people as dementia progresses, the gaze level goes downward. And so if you've got a sign or a picture somewhere and it's up at your eye level and their eye level is down here, they're going to miss it completely. Consider creative ways to highlight different rooms. And I'll kind of show some images on the next slide. You can paint a door frame a different color, put some tape around the door frame. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of highlight where that room is that they're trying to find. And then you can also create unique pathways. I did this with someone toward the end of my clinical career where I had them using some colored tape on the floor, like carpet tape, to really show their path from where the recliner was going to their bathroom. And then you really can think of that contrasting tape as well to mark the edge of stairs. If people are having some safety issues with stairs, you see that when you're out in public where people have that bright yellow color tape at the edge of a stair. And you'll notice my little side note at the bottom. I think it's really important to consider having a great physical therapist and occupational therapist in your care team to really help do a home safety assessment, look at your home, ways to help you maintain that safety, prevent falls. They're really great to have in your team. Not just saying that because I am one. So here's some ideas that I've used in the past. You'll notice in that upper left-hand corner, that's very similar to what I did in the gentleman's home, where they had moved to an assisted living and his dementia was advancing. So now he's in a whole new environment and he could not figure out the path from the recliner to the bathroom. And so we did this with colored tape. really marking it. And I think his wife even got pictures of like little, toilets or something that she found and put kind of on the way. You've got to think of what's comfortable for you in modifying your home. That might not be the look you're going for at all. In the center, that's just from a design photo I found. So evidently painting the door frame red is quite savvy. So that's another way to kind of help someone see maybe that door or that room that they're looking for. In the top right-hand corner, those X's on the floor with that chair, that is for those people that have trouble when they're navigating to the chair, right? And that approach to sit. So it shows exactly where to put the feet. And that's what we would work on when we were training transfers. If someone was really missing the chair or kind of falling into the chair, to help them have a little bit more visual input. In the bottom left-hand corner, this is a funny story here of a lovely lady that with her Parkinson's, and she had Parkinson's disease, dementia, her movement was very sped up, which is not always the case. We think of slow, right? But sometimes people have festination where their gait's like a runaway train, and she tended to be a little bit impulsive. So the turtle reminded her to slow down and be more safe. And so she wanted a turtle everywhere. I think she bought crystal turtles and stone turtles, but it was a reminder for her of like, oh, I've got to slow down and try to be a little more safe. Bottom right-hand corner, that bright yellow colored tape on that black looking carpet is a great example of that contrast and giving the brain more input when they're climbing stairs to help with that safety in the home. So even though visual hallucinations are really more of a psychiatric feature, I wanted to pull this in because it's such a difficult thing for most families to deal with. So when your loved one's having a hallucination that's frightening, try to reassure them that they're safe. Consider moving to another room where maybe you can get away from whatever triggered the hallucination if there was something in that room. You can try increasing the lighting and maybe the visual and auditory stimuli with things like watching a movie or turning on some music or some books on tape. Hopefully ones the person's really interested in, not Shaft, if they'd rather be watching that Van Gogh film. And then this is so important. Really try to work on avoid spending long periods of time in dim lighting. So the recliner in front of the television with no lights on is really, idle hands are the devil's plaything. It's like the brain then starts to fill in the blank spaces, and this can really contribute to those hallucinations a lot. You want to try to prevent sleep deprivation. And I know sleep disturbances can be a big problem with Lewy. So maybe talking with your doctor about your sleep problems, doing a sleep study. Sometimes a sleep medicine provider will be recommended because you ultimately are working to always try to maintain the proper day-night schedule. And then it's important to note too that poor vision can lead to visual hallucinations as well. And so you want to refer any treatment of eye conditions, and keep your prescription lenses up to date. Don't miss, seeing the ophthalmologist or the optometrist. Going every year. And we're going to have a great session on vision coming up, as I mentioned, in August to really get a lot more detailed with how you can take care of your vision with Lewy. So one of the last sections we'll get into here is talking about working memory. And so this is that temporary storing of information and manipulating it over a short period. So going to the kitchen to get, a glass of water and then forgetting why you were headed there. That's working memory. We're not talking about remembering who your friends are, your family. That's more what we call amnestic or that long-term memory. And that doesn't tend to be as much of a problem for people, especially early on in Lewy. So it's a lot of internal strategies that you can try. And these, I wanted to share them. I think these are more maybe for care partners or people early on in Lewy, but I think that we all need some cognitive strategies every now and then. The top one has helped me a lot. I try to pay attention, especially I'm really bad about losing my keys. And so anytime I have my keys in my hand, I will repeat to myself, I'm putting my keys in my purse or in my pocket or in the drawer. It's like I kind of have to rehearse that. And you can repeat that idea on the way to the task to kind of help with your attention more. You can chunk. So that's what we do with phone numbers, where we group numbers together or words together or even tasks together. So maybe, you have medication to take every day at the same time. So you're like, I'm going to take it with breakfast or with lunch, and kind of chunk those two activities. You can try to create a mental picture of whatever it is that you're trying to remember and really commit that to mind. I'll give an example in a moment of how you can make an association, and that can be very helpful, especially for learning someone's name or remembering new information. And then you can always create an acronym. So if you're going to the store and you want to get some carrots and some apples and tomatoes, it's easier to remember cat a lot of times than it is to remember those three things. So you can create that little acronym. And then once again, there it is, get organized, a place for everything and everything in its place. It makes it really difficult to navigate these cognitive challenges if you're dealing with a lot of clutter and distractions. And there's a lot of external aids that we all are familiar with. Simple and low tech ones like a whiteboard there that you can put on the fridge, a to-do list or a Post-it note, or a planner. And then even going into some more technology, like, using a reminder on your cell phone or a med alarm, or Alexa, or some of those Siri, some of those products to kind of give you those reminders for things that you need to do. And so an example of making an association is, I think my name's on the screen, so you remember who I am. But if we met, out somewhere and you're thinking, trying to remember people's names, you could think Julia, like Julia Roberts. Or in my case, probably a little more like Julia Child, or your cousin Julia, your neighbor Julia. But trying to link information to something that's already in that neural network. So you're taking that new information and associating it with something that you've known much longer. All right, so last, before we take some questions, we're going to talk about some different therapeutic approaches and some brain health strategies, because we get a lot of questions about this too. So this is actually an article that was done on cognitive impairment in Parkinson's disease. And Dr. Jennifer Goldman is one of our scientific advisors. And I think that they did a great job of kind of making some recommendations just for general brain health here. So you'll notice here in early to mid-stage Parkinson's, which you can think of this as early to mid-stage in Lewy, so kind of earlier on. Exercising according to guidelines from the American College of Sports Medicine or the American Heart Association. And so basically, I think for most of us, that's 150 minutes, kind of that moderate intensity exercise a week. And there's a lot of different ways you can get that. This is where a physical therapist might be really helpful to help recommend appropriate exercise groups in your area or different modalities of exercise. You'll notice number 2, our Surgeon General mentioned recently that social isolation, loneliness is a really big health concern. And that's a huge health concern for people with these neurodegenerative conditions too. So staying socially active, however possible. So that could be spending time with friends and family, or even joining a support group. We have a lot of those at LBDA too, if you're looking for a support group. You can also engage in some cognitive training exercises. It's important to note that what these look like, this is not really pen and paper or computer tasks trying to improve those different domains, but really looking at some strategies. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And you'll notice on that next one, working with an OT or a neuropsychologist on developing strategies to help you pay attention, remember to do things, or perform everyday tasks. We get a whole lot of questions about number 5, nutrition. So, there's all these rumors out there of different diets, or should you not eat meat, or what. At this point, the Mediterranean diet is one that's recommended, also the MIND diet. And so you can look those up online and find great resources out there. They're mostly a whole foods diet, and not whole foods as in the grocery store, but meaning whole grains, fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, and limiting processed foods and sugars. Number 6 is so important. And I encourage everyone out there, whether you're living with Lewy or you're a care partner supporting, to really support taking your time when doing tasks. Remember those 2 slow things: bradyphrenia, slow thinking, bradykinesia, slow movement. Across the board, typically for people with these conditions, everything takes longer. That time pressure will make someone anxious, and then it makes things harder. So just really be sure and carve out enough time to complete a task so you don't feel pressured. Let your family and friends know if you're having trouble. And I think this can be really difficult because often people want to protect their loved ones and their family and not let them know that you're struggling because you're afraid that they'll worry. But they want to help and they need to be part of your team. So it's important to have these open discussions and talk about issues that you're experiencing. And then number 8, you'll notice, is to seek help if you're feeling depressed or anxious. Changes to mood are very common with Lewy body dementia, and these can really impact cognitive function as well. So, and these are very stigmatized, I think, in our culture still. So if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling worried about things, talk to your doctor about that and see if you maybe need to seek counseling or get some more help. And then you'll notice for advanced Parkinson's or more advancing conditions, to keep those above recommendations and add in a highly structured daily routine that you're following. We'll talk more about that. Considering the use of medication, which we talked about earlier, having an advanced directive in place like a living will. For care partners, so important. And I don't think this should be left until advanced. I think this happens up in the earlier one. Take care of your own health as well. Make sure that you're seeing doctors and caring for yourself too. And then also seeking out support such as counseling. Our Lewy line can be a great place to seek that support as well. Okay, so occupational therapy was mentioned in that article just to kind of give an overview, because a lot of people do not realize that occupational therapists address cognition. I battle this myth all the time. So we're really experts at measuring functional cognition. So we're looking at your everyday task performance, be it your self-care routines, managing your house, doing your work tasks, and how your cognition is maybe acting as a challenge or barrier. And then we're going to try to identify these different performance-based impairments, and they may be very subtle or they may be very obvious. And then ultimately, we're really going to work to help treat and give you strategies around that, because we know that those changes can potentially compromise safety and overall long-term well-being. So we're really in your court to help you do whatever is meaningful to you. I wanted to use this as an example here. This was so we talked about that cognitive training earlier. So this is a study that looked at cognitive rehab for dementias associated with Parkinson's. And as you remember in that first slide, which would include our Lewy body dementias here. So goal-oriented cognitive rehabilitation basically uses goal setting. So what do you want to do? For example, I had a gentleman one time that he wanted to mix his own drink, as in a cocktail. And his doctor said that was fine. He could have one drink a day. And he really, really wanted to do it himself. And so my job then was to look at strategies to help improve his function so he could meet that goal, right? And so what we ultimately did, I talked to this wife too. What are you worried about with him making his own drink? Well, the liquor was in this beautiful crystal carafe that she didn't want to get broken. Well, what if we put some in a shatterproof craft? There's a lot of beautiful melamine and acrylic things that we can get now. So she did that. He was able to mix his own drink. We got some colored glassware too, so he could see things better. And he was happy as a clam. What they found is that when they used this cognitive rehabilitation in this group, it was superior to treatment as usual. So people that just kept doing whatever they were doing, and relaxation therapy. And not only for the individual with dementia, but for the care partner. So as the person with dementia becomes more independent and is happier doing things for themselves, the care partner usually gets a little bit of a less burden too. So they felt from this that cognitive rehab was feasible and potentially effective. So this is something to think of when you go into your therapist, to have some goals. What do you want to work on? Because that's what you're going to be most motivated to do. Cognitive stimulation, I think it's important to note what this means. So this is just, activities they're going to do, general cognitive and social stimulation. So group discussions, support groups, book clubs, maybe doing some games or trivia night. Music related activities are amazing for people with dementia. But notice my little flash down there at the bottom. It has to be meaningful to the individual. If the person hated games, for example, or trivia, you don't want to, that's not the person to take to trivia night. So we want to really think of those interests, past and present, and see how to really capitalize on that. Something I wanted to highlight here, life stories are an activity in which a person with dementia is supported by the family or staff to kind of gather and review past life events and essentially build a personal biography. I've seen some commercials even on television for some different ways that you can do this now. And this really helps people share their stories and enhance their sense of identity. It can really help better communication and understanding of the person's needs. So a lot of family carers and even paid carers find this very helpful because then they understand the individual they're helping more. It can also help the person develop closer relationships. And I saw this with a family I was working with that they had adult daughters. The gentleman was in very advanced stages of Parkinson's disease, and they wanted to be able to talk with their dad when they would come home and visit. And they downloaded some of these from the Legacy project that I've got here and went through these with their dad, and they were just so grateful. They learned so many things about him, about his life that they didn't know. It really got him talking because we all like to talk about ourselves, and so he was communicating a lot more. So these are some great resources and ideas of things to do with your loved one. Some different strategies for daily life. I'm trying to move along here so we can get to questions. I've mentioned those familiar, consistent, structured daily routines that become so important. Thinking about how to transition gradually to task. Music can be great to support that. I've had people that I had them pick out a song for when they went to exercise group, for example, because they play the Rocky theme at their boxing class. So we would turn that on. One gentleman, it was, he liked to go to the opera. And so it was when he was going to start getting ready for the opera at night, they would start playing opera music. So these are ways to kind of help that person transition. You can coach frequent reorientation of just, oh, today's Thursday, we're going to, dance class today, or we're going to go see cousin Bob, kind of just letting them know what's going on, what's coming up. I think it's important to schedule contact with family and friends, and this can be by phone or video to kind of keep in touch and really keep that person connected to family. You want to try to store belongings in predictable, familiar places so people aren't searching for things that they want to be able to find, maybe on their own even. Once again, you can mark items with pictures, but like I said, it might be a picture drawing or a label or a picture of the inside of what it is. And maintaining a highly visible schedule that you can discuss, that you can kind of show, maybe with pictures. I know for one of my gentlemen, we had pictures when he was coming to therapy of all of the therapists, and so they kind of would have that up when it was time to come see us that day. And that can really help prepare for those transitions. Well, there it is again, decreasing clutter and distractions so that you're really minimizing what the brain has to process. Establishing those cognitive stimulation activities. I think every day thinking of peaks and valleys in the routine, having some stimulation and activity, allowing for some downtime and rest. And making sure to utilize those meaningful hobbies and activities. That's what's really going to help keep someone involved. So sleep hygiene, I'm not going to go through all of these since we're running a little late, but you'll notice here that it's really, really important to have a consistent sleep and wake time. You want to set a bedtime so you can get 7 hours of sleep. Having that relaxing bedtime routine of maybe reading for a little bit, or maybe some prayer or meditation, or talking with each other before you go to sleep. Temperature of the bedroom can be important, and this is very unique to the individual. Research suggests around 60 to 67 degrees, but play around. And I'm going to not make friends with everyone right here. Get the TV out of your bedroom. Get the TV out of your bedroom, the computer out of your bedroom. Don't have the smartphone in the bedroom. The blue light from these devices can stimulate a part of the brain that remains active for up to 2 hours after that exposure and can really keep the brain very alert. So you might fall asleep with the TV on, but then you might wake up a little bit later because the brain is still activated. No nonsense here. I think avoid meals, caffeine, and alcohol right before bedtime, getting some regular exercise at an earlier time of the day, and then using the bed for sleep and sex only. So it's not the place to bill pay or watch television or solve the world's problems. And then this is another one too, sometimes reducing fluids before around 8 o'clock at night, so that maybe the need to get up and go to the bathroom won't be so much. So lastly here, establishing some spaces. So if you're working on different activities, you want to set aside a room or an area where you're going to have those items for that activity, and that activity will always take place there. And depending on what their hobby or their interest is, create a special activity for that. Maybe you have, with one of my gentlemen, I had his books out, his art books and his photo albums. And maybe some people have a craft area. I had a gentleman that liked to tinker a lot. And so we had little things out that he could tinker. And create that area so that it has all the items that they need to do that activity. So they're set up if they have an interest in doing something, they can just go and engage. So in summary here, discuss changes to cognition with your family and also with your healthcare team so they can better understand what you're seeing, what changes are happening, and whether there needs to be medical management or maybe there's even an infection or something else going on. Seek occupational therapy, speech language pathology, even physical therapy early and often so that you can learn strategies to support continued engagement in whatever is meaningful. Exercise the brain. For care partners and for people with Lewy, try to stay physically, socially, and cognitively active as much as possible. And then ultimately, what we talked about a lot today was simplifying activities and keeping a consistent daily routine. All right. So with that, I encourage you all to save the date for our next webinar coming up, which will be Thursday, June 22nd at 2 o'clock. And our Senior Manager of Support Services, the lovely Brandi Hackett, who has our amazing social work powers, will help you learn real life tips and techniques to prepare for and manage those complicated medical appointments. And she's going to give you some strategies to help you streamline information for medical providers and advocate for needs that you have even between appointments. All right, and with that, I thank you very much. That's my email, jwood@lbda.org, if you need to reach me for anything. And with that, I will stop sharing and we'll take a look at the questions here. Okay, so let me grab, I printed out some, excuse me, that were sent in ahead of time. And I'm going to take a look at the Q&A and see what I can find out here. All right. So can I comment on the differences between donepezil and rivastigmine? Cost can vary hugely. Can side effects be a problem? Gonna be honest, I route all questions about drugs to physicians. So I would definitely talk with your doctor about that. I am not a medical physician and I don't play one at any time. And so I won't play one now. So I apologize. Can medication side effects be dangerous? Yes, there can be some medication side effects that can be dangerous, but medications to manage symptoms can be very, very helpful. So I would really encourage you to talk with your doctor about what the medication options are. If you're going to start a new medication, ask what the potential side effects could be, and then try to track and see if those are happening. How accurate is a neuropsychological evaluation for a person with fluctuating cognition? It is a bit of a moving target, but if you get a good neuropsychologist that I think can really look at differences in how you present on those assessments, maybe moment to moment, I think they can really tease it out. Neuropsychologists are pretty crafty at that. Okay, here we go. So could you talk about trying to read from an iPad? My eyes get really tired. Is it the blue light or the font size? It could be a little bit of both, Pearl. So I would say on your iPad, you can really set it up to increase the contrast, and that can help a lot. So a lot of times if you set the contrast at 100%, it'll give you a darker background with a lighter font, and you can see that better. Play around with settings. You can go to, with an iPad, you can go to an Apple store and have their lovely technicians help you kind of set up adjustments on it and see what works for you. You might even have, maybe you're quite techie yourself or have a techie friend that could help, but looking at ways to adjust, I think the contrast and the brightness on the screen will be helpful. Putting on clothes facing frontwards, not backwards. I've worked with this a lot with people, so sometimes it can be putting something that really marks where the back of the item is more. So maybe they don't really see the tag. So I've had people, one woman used a Sharpie and on the tag of her husband's thing put back on the tag so he could see that that was the back of the garment. Depending on the level that your loved one is at, sometimes setting up the clothing. So like if it's a shirt, putting it on their lap face down so that when they go to put it on, it's acclimated the right way. Some other things that I've done is taking a safety pin and having a little label that says front or back that I put on the front or the back of the shirt. You really have to kind of play around with this. Funny thing is I had to work with my husband a lot with this when our daughter was little because he would always put her clothes on backwards. So that's why I was kind of cracking up at your question. Okay, we answered the fluctuating cognition. Okay. Any ideas on managing extreme apathy? Oh, goodness. That is such a hard one, you guys. And I didn't talk a lot about apathy today, but what apathy is it is a loss of interest in things that people typically were interested in. So like take baking, like we talked about earlier. Maybe that person has always loved baking and now they just don't want to participate in baking at all. A lot of times it's trying to find different things that will be of interest. I don't know your family. I don't know you. I would really have to dig in there and see what kind of makes you tick. But one thing that I always went to almost immediately was grandchildren, because I found that people would do things for grandchildren they would never do for themselves or other people, my parents included. And a lot of times if it was like the grandchild's going to come over and we're going to do X, Y, or Z activity, then they were up for it. So think about maybe some things that might motivate the individual a little bit more. All right. Excellent. And so let's see, my mother loves decorating. So she moves the furniture around a lot in the living room. Oh, my father was just diagnosed with Lewy about a month ago. I'm thinking from watching this that rearranging the furniture could cause a problem. Yes, very much so. Very much so. So it's kind of good to keep some consistency, I would think, and not be changing frequently. So I would encourage your mom to find an arrangement that works, especially in the living room, and it's comfortable, and try to stick with that as much as possible. And then maybe she can play around with decorating with candles or flowers or accessories. She can go get some things to set up contrast in all those environments. But I definitely would encourage your mom to not be rearranging the living room a lot. Are there strategies for dealing with periods of the catatonic, like withdrawal, which that's probably a fluctuation, or periods of Capgras delusion? So you guys, the Capgras delusion is where you think that your spouse or your loved one is an imposter. So I had a woman who thought that her husband was her deceased father. We have a great, you noticed in the reel in the beginning, our Mediflix, so mediflix.com. If you go on there, we have some Lewy briefs, and there's one specifically on Capgras delusion with some strategies around that. So since we're running out of time, I'm going to let you take a look at that. I'll also include in the follow-up email our resource on managing behavioral symptoms, because I think that would help a lot. As far as the kind of catatonic like withdrawal, that's typically a fluctuation, pause, and patience. So that a lot of times is just letting them kind of come out of it. Maybe if there's some type of music that's stimulating an upbeat or an activity that they like, you might try putting on some music or headphones. Sometimes that can pull people out of it. But a lot of times you have to kind of let that period fade. Okay, did that one. Okay. All right, my husband's getting frustrated by his iPhone, too many options, very fast changes. Yes. Simpler options. So you guys, one thing that I like, there are different phones now that you can look at that are much more simple. The Jitterbug is one. There are different phones that have a very simplified platform. Now, that being said, try to stay with whatever your loved one's been using. Like I had someone that had a push button phone, right, forever. And their family thought, oh, we'll get the Jitterbug, but the touch screen will be easier. This individual had never used a touch screen. It made it much more complicated. Alan, cognitive screen. I don't really think Allen Cognitive Screen is the best for people living with Lewy. I think there are others that could be better because of a lot of the visuospatial issues and fine motor issues. I think there's a lot of layers of complexity that could lend the Allen Cognitive Screen to not being the best choice. It seems that my dad enjoys going out, even as just to drive around. He does not sleep while riding. Going out's better in the morning. Going out late in the afternoon or at night is not a good idea because he gets restless. Why is this? So sometimes with fatigue at the end of the day, people can get more restless. Sometimes sundowning can happen too, where when the light starts to get a little bit more toward dusk, those shadows can start to cause some hallucinations and some things like that. So, that could be it, is maybe he needs a nap in the afternoon to kind of offset that fatigue before it hits, or maybe keeping the lights up a little bit more in the home as well. Is it better for him to get up early in the morning for this reason? I think I'll let you talk with your doctor about that, but sleep is sacred with Lewy, and a lot of times they don't sleep well. So unless they're sleeping insanely late, I think let them sleep and kind of structure the day then beyond that. Absolutely, I'll send those resources for the life stories out. Any more comment on how to respond to verbal delusional accusation that the care partner is unfaithful? You guys, this is so common, and we have a great video that I'll put a link in the resources by Tanis Furman where she talks about this. The big thing is not to argue. I mean, this is very common, and also realize you haven't done anything wrong to trigger that delusion. Those paranoid delusions are very common in Lewy and very frustrating, I know, and heartbreaking, but just try to redirect if you can, direct to an activity as much as possible. And I'll send out some resources on that too. Excellent. All right. Liking to sleep a lot. How often have you found LBD to be misdiagnosed? Very often. I'm trying to remember now, one of our experts gave a statistic recently, and it was very shocking, of like a number, misdiagnosed. But basically what we know is for most people, it takes multiple physicians up to 1.5 years, and most people are diagnosed with something else first, like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. So very, very common. Yep, with the session will be recorded, so we will be sending that out. And I think with that, we're out of time. We went a little bit over. I will definitely, take a look at some of these questions too and see if I can send it out with the response. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was a
Allison, we can't hear you. Oh, there you are.
What a wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone for attending, for staying on a little bit longer. I think it was well worth to hear the questions being answered. So much here. I think we could, probably go on. Oh, look at all the hearts and thumbs up, everything. Thank you so much for the feedback. Julia is so wonderful, and we're so lucky to have her here at LBDA. If you have ideas for topics you would like to get covered, if you have additional questions, I encourage you please to contact us at LBDA. We have other staff who are here waiting to speak with you and provide you with resources. As a reminder, you will get an email in about a week with the link to this presentation and information about the next webinar. That will be on Thursday, June 22nd at 2 p.m., same time as today. Brandi Hackett, another one of our amazing staff members at LBDA, will be sharing real-life tips and techniques for effectively managing medical appointments in Lewy body dementia. And we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Allison. Thanks, everyone.